Hi, I'm Steve Tucker, the producer of the event today, and I wanted to share a few housekeeping items. As you all know, we're using the Zoom webinar platform, so only the host and experts will be on video. If you would like to make comments or ask a question, you can type it in the chat box below for Q&A. Please take a moment to locate where it is. This session is being recorded and will be available to watch and share later this week. And now I have the pleasure of introducing you to the Aspen Brain Institute's founder and president, Glenda Greenwald.
Hello, welcome everyone. Hello to people all over the United States. We have people today with us from 46 states in the United States and 79 countries around the world. Thank you all for coming. This is our 5th Zoom Aspen Brain Institute Expert Series. We're offering this free series, hoping that this will be the foundation of building a global online community dedicated and focused on brain health. Our objective is not simply to reach a lot of people. We're hoping we can help a lot of people. We would like to thank Lugano Diamonds for their generous support as our national underwriter. We also want to thank them for choosing Aspen Brain Institute as a nonprofit worthy of their support and their values, and for making our Zoom expert series free to the public and being able to be viewed worldwide. We also thank Alpine Bank for their generous sponsorship over the last many years. They are the best community bank in Aspen. And thanks to our friends at Brain Futures, which is translating science to advance human potential. And one more, thank you to our friends at American Federation for Research on Aging for their support. First, I want to tell you 1 minute about Aspen Brain Institute and then quickly get to our exciting speaker, Bob Roth, who will then be in conversation with our second expert, Dr. Norman Rosenthal. So at Aspen Brain Institute, we're dedicating our lives and our work to making sure that this is the last generation of 60 to 95-year-olds who are decimated by Alzheimer's and other dementias for which there are no cures. At the Aspen Brain Institute, we believe this is one of the greatest global challenges of our time. With that in mind, we have a very big aspirational goal. We have turned away from fighting brain disease, and we are pivoting toward creating brain health. So our real goal, our real mission now is to create a brain healthy planet. So now in the time of COVID, we're producing this expert series of speakers free to the invited public. To over 2,000 people from all over the world have signed up for the series. The purpose of the series is to increase brain health literacy and to share access to the top minds and evidence-based research on brain health. So now I'm pleased to introduce our first expert speaker. Our expert speaker is Bob Roth. Bob is one of the most experienced and sought after teachers of meditation from all over the world. Over the past 45 years, Bob has taught Transcendental Meditation to many thousands of people, including CEOs, Hollywood celebrities, combat-scarred veterans, and inner city youth. He currently serves as the CEO of the famous David Lynch Foundation. He's also the host of the SiriusXM radio show called Success Without Stress. And he has his new iHeartRadio podcast called Stay Calm, which has already 135,000 listeners after 4 weeks. Unbelievable, Bob. But he speaks frequently about the science of meditation to industry leaders at such gatherings as Google Zeitgeist, Aspen Ideas Festival, Wisdom 2.0, and the Aspen Brain Lab. For me, I think of Bob Roth as an apostle for transcendental meditation, or maybe better said, the Johnny Appleseed of transcendental meditation, as he offers free meditations about 10 times a day, 7 days a week, to thousands all over the world, including myself. I'm an advocate. I'm anxious to hear what Bob has to tell us, and after he'll be in conversation with his good friend and renowned psychiatrist and author, Dr. Norman Rosenthal. We are honored to have both of you with us here today. Bob, take it away.
Thank you very much, Glenda. You're an extraordinary human being, and the work that you and your team are doing with Aspen Brain Institute is timely and necessary.
Thank you, thank you.
So I look back when I first learned to meditate was June 28th, 1969. I was between my freshman and sophomore year in college. I had been on a track. I wanted to be the next Bobby Kennedy. I wanted to change the world. I thought politics was going to be the way to do it, change legislation, write legislation. It didn't take me long to realize that politics, while important, crucial, for me wasn't going to be my path. My mom was a school teacher, and I thought, okay, I'll write educational curriculum. I'll come up with tools, develop tools that we can give children, particularly at the time I was wanting to work with kids in under-resourced schools, tools that would help them navigate a very tumultuous life. That was 1968. So I was going to school full-time, working full-time, stressed, riots in the streets because of the Vietnam War, and a skeptical person. There was a lot of crazy stuff that was going on in those days in college, and I wasn't particularly interested in going down any weird route. And I met a guy who knew a guy who was a friend who was really down to earth, and he was doing something called Transcendental Meditation. It was not a word in my vocabulary, didn't have any receptor sites, but there was something unique about him that was extraordinary. So I said, I don't believe in that stuff. And he held up a pen, and he dropped the pen, and he said, you don't have to believe in gravity for gravity to work. You don't have to believe in this for it to work, this meditation for it to work. So I learned it. And one of my first experiences was so profoundly relaxing, such relief, and I just felt settled and awake. One of my first thoughts then after that was, oh, so this is a tool I want to end up teaching those kids. And that was 51 years ago. And now I have the great good fortune to help run the David Lynch Foundation, and we've brought the meditation to over 1 million kids in under-resourced schools for free throughout the United States and all over the world. And now we're working with veterans and their families who suffer from post-traumatic stress and high levels of suicide and depression. And we work with kids who are, in the midst of war zones. I say all of this to say that the world has changed when it comes to meditation, changed when it comes to the understanding what it does and its applications. And I think one of the individuals who's been at the forefront of this change, this scientific understanding of what meditation is and does, and it turns out there's not just one type of meditation, one generic meditation. There are many different types. The guy who's been at the forefront of that is my guest and good friend here, Dr. Norman Rosenthal, and I'm just going to read you a little bit of his bio. Dr. Rosenthal is a world-renowned psychiatrist, medical researcher, best-selling author, and he's currently the clinical professor of psychiatry at Georgetown University School of Medicine. He did his psychiatric residency at Columbia University in New York City before going on to the National Institutes of Mental Health in Bethesda, where he spent 20 years as a senior researcher. One of his first major research contributions was to describe and name seasonal affective disorder and to develop light therapy as a treatment for this novel condition. Dr. Rosenthal is a highly cited researcher who has written over 200 scholarly articles and authored or co-authored 8 books, including Winter Blues, the New York Times bestseller Transcendence, Gift of Adversity, and also Supermind. So, Dr. Rosenthal, are you there? Can you join me? You're on mute.
Happy to be here with my good friend Bob Roth. I first started meditating maybe 50 years ago. I was a medical student, but I soon, unfortunately, let it lapse. And so it was for 35 years until I was with a patient in my office. And he said to me, you know, your medicines are helping me, but what's making me really happy is TM. So I said, well, yeah, I know about that, but he ferreted out the story from me and figured out that I'd stopped doing it. And he said, you know, you have to meet my teacher, Bob Roth. And he set up that meeting, and the rest is history. With Bob's encouragement and help, I wrote Transcendence and Supermind. I'm back to meditating twice a day, and my life has really changed. And I have been researching it and continue to do that with great delight on veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder and other situations. And so I'm so delighted to be here. Bob, of course, as we all know, is the world premier TM teacher and a great expert. Strength in Stillness is a fantastic opening gambit to get into the great game of TM. And of course, now we've got a podcast. And
Okay, Norm.
All right.
We praised these. All right, I have a question for you. Thank you very much, dear friend. I'm going to ask you a question, okay? So.
Yeah, but before you do, my goal was to embarrass you by telling everybody all about you. So
Achieved. Okay, so here's the question. When you and I started 50 years ago, now I didn't even want to say the word meditation in polite company. I didn't even want to say it. Now it's everywhere. I like to say that there's never been a greater need for meditation. There's never been a greater opportunity to meditate. There's so many apps. There's so many different meditation types. And I also feel there's never been more misunderstandings about what meditation actually is. There's so many things. So could you, in a couple minutes, just give a definition or what science understands about meditation writ large, and then some details, some specifics?
Well, I think one thing that really makes a difference is that not all meditations are the same. And when I first heard that, and I heard about meditation, TM specifically, I'm a skeptic. I'm a scientist by training, and I like to see data. And, when I heard TM is different, in some ways it's better, I thought, well, everybody says their thing is better than everybody else's. But, as the saying goes, I came to scoff and remained to pray. It really is better because there's tons of data supporting its strong physiological effects. The TM effect specifically of lowering blood pressure, lowering sympathetic response, lowering anxiety and startle response. All these things have been so impressive to me that I've been happy to recommend it to my patients, and that sort of led me to write the books and do the research that I'm doing.
So what I'd like to do is take a moment, and in about 5 minutes or so, Glenda is going to come back and she has questions for us that people have written. But a lot of times people say, well, what is meditation? How does it differ? And I like to use an analogy that you're on a little boat and you're in the middle of the ocean, and all of a sudden you get these giant 30, 40, 50-foot high waves, and you could think that the whole ocean is in upheaval. Whole ocean is a bit of an exaggeration, because if you did a cross-section out there, you'd realize you've got these 30, 40, 50-foot high waves on the surface, but the ocean in reality is miles deep, and while it may be turbulent by its nature on the surface, it's pretty darn silent by its nature at its depth. So we use that as an analogy I like to use that as an analogy for the mind. Surface of the mind is the active thinking mind. Some traditions call it the monkey mind. I like to call it the gotta mind. As in, I gotta do this, and I gotta do that, and I gotta call him, and I gotta call her, and I gotta make a list. Anybody? I gotta slow down, I gotta get going. And so it's a natural human desire. We all have it. I like some inner calm, I like some inner clarity, I like some inner connectedness, some inner equanimity. And the operative word there is inner. And the question is there such a thing as an inner? And if so, how do we get there? So enter the realm of meditation, the whole field of meditation, which is, of course, thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. And it turns out, according to brain science, that there's 3 distinct types of meditation. The first 2, there's some back and forth on it, but 3, they call them 3 distinct types of meditation. And that is, first is called focused attention. And focused attention, the assumption there is, and I'm doing this very quickly, concentration, focused attention. If you want to have a calm ocean, waves are the disruptor of calm, so stop the waves and you'll have a calm ocean. If you want to have a calm mind, thoughts can be the disruptor of calm, so minimize thoughts, stop thoughts, put more space between your thoughts. Focus and concentrate on a sound, on a point of your body, on an idea, with concentration. When we do that, it creates gamma brain waves, which are 20 to 50 cycles per second. Now, this is very simplified. Second approach is called open monitoring. And many mindfulness techniques are involved in open monitoring. Open monitoring tells us, in brief, that thoughts themselves are not necessarily the disruptor of calm, but the content of thoughts can be the disruptor of calm. So if you have a thought about a guy named Joe, and 10 years ago Joe done you wrong, and you think about him, so in open monitoring, we learn to dispassionately observe thoughts, moods, feelings, and behaviors. There's mindful walking and mindful talking. And I should pause here. I'm going to interrupt saying, I'm not here saying better or worse. I'm saying different mechanics, different outcomes. That's all. I'm just what we understand. So open monitoring, dispassionately observe your thoughts, your moves, your feelings. So live in the present moment. Don't be 10 years ago. Be here, now. And there's countless mindfulness approaches. When we do that, there's many different changes in the brain, but one particular is theta brain waves, 4 to 8 cycles per second. And that's when it's following our thought, meaning of thoughts, or pre-onset dream. These 2 approaches are called cognitive approaches to meditation, pertaining to your thoughts, your moods, your feelings, etc., so pertaining to the waves. The third approach, self-transcending, recognizes that there's a vertical dimension to our mind, that we feel things deeply, that we hurt deeply, we love deeply, we have an intuition. Somebody says they have an idea to Norman, oh Norman, here's an idea you should do for a book, and it makes perfectly good sense on the surface, but on a deep intuition level, it doesn't feel right. In self-transcending, we hypothesize that deeper than that, far deeper than even intuition, there's a level where the mind is, right now, for all of us, already settled and peaceful and wide awake. And we can have Norman discuss some of the, again, the changes that goes on in the brain, but largely what you see is the electrical activity of the brain is alpha 1, which are 8 to 10 cycles per second, and that's a state where your mind is settled and awake, and it bathes the whole cortex of the brain. And then there's a profound relaxation. Those are the 3 different approaches. Cognitive approaches and one transcending. And the last thing I'll say is sometimes people say, what do you mean by transcendental? And they say, it sounds weird. Trance. No, not trance. To transcend. To transcend, according to the dictionary, is to go beyond ordinary human limitations. And we try to do that outside by breaking boundaries, by well, now we're in quarantine, but going places and doing different things. But in TM, we access what's called a transcendent level of the mind, which is settled and unbounded. So they all work in concert. They're different techniques, and I firmly believe, if it's evidence-based, that when we talk about meditation, we should be talking about tools in a toolbox. Tools in a toolbox, not either or, but yes and. So do we have time? Should we go to questions now, Glenda, or do I have time to ask Dr. Rosenthal a question?
please have, you've got another 5 or 7 minutes, please.
Oh, okay, good. Dr. Rosenthal, please go back into some of the changes that you mentioned them, reductions in sympathetic activation, but talk a little bit more about what's going on in the brain and what this means coherence in the brain during transcending.
Well, I think it's important to remember that the brain and body work best when they work in sync with each other. So when we transcend, there are parallel changes going on in the brain and the body. You've just mentioned the alpha-1 waves, the calming waves that sweep across the brain, particularly the prefrontal areas, just behind our forehead. So there they are coming, bathing us in these calm waves, and at the same time, different parts of the brain are working more coherently. In other words, their different brain waves that are happening at different regions correspond to each other, showing that they're working together in a sort of more collaborative way. And then as that's happening, there's a relaxation in the body, and the relaxation in the body is accompanied by a slowing of the breath. So you get this massive shift towards calming and peacefulness. But a very interesting thing happens, and that is that despite the fact that you're in this calm, relaxed state, sometimes the brain is working in some very interesting ways. Many times people will tell me they come out of the state of transcendence with their minds full of ideas, full of novel solutions to things that they were thinking about before they went in. So in the actual state of meditation, there's tremendous things going on in brain and body that are working together. And the next chapter will be what happens between meditations, because that's when you get your real payoff.
Okay, one more question, and that is, there's this whole idea of the default mode network in the brain, the idea of creativity and the brain and different types of meditation could you talk a little bit about the default mode network and the interesting new names that it's been given, what that is?
Yes, very interestingly, initially when they did studies and they were trying to look at various brain centers, they had a control condition, which is sit there with your eyes shut and don't think of anything. And what they found was that the brain never does nothing. The brain is always doing something. If it's asleep, it's got sleep-related brain waves. If it's meditating, it's got meditation-related brain waves. And if it's doing nothing, it's got nothing-related brain waves, the default mode network. The network that comes alive when you're told to just sit and do nothing. And what's emerged is that, and they've actually been able to map it out with specific brain regions associated with it, but what's emerged is that it's a very creative part of the brain. And I'm sure many of you recognize times when you're noodling away at a problem and you just can't unstick it. And then maybe you go into the shower, or you go for a stroll, or you meditate. You do something that is not focused on the problem at hand, and bingo, the solution comes to mind. The default mode network, as it's been called, and as you see, it's not a default, it's the dream network or the plan network or whatever, the creativity network. But as you see, it's very much alive, and I believe that's partially what's activated during TM.
Well, actually, they have two. Glenda, you can be heard, Glenda.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm going to interrupt as soon as you're finished.
Okay, just want to say one last thing,
Sure,
and then you're on.
Please.
They actually have two new names. They have two names for the default mode network. They call it the Imagination Network now, and they also call it the Genius Lounge. So you can look that up. Google it, Genius Lounge and Imagination Network, and those two areas do wake up during transcending. Okay, Glenda, it's yours.
Okay, well, you guys are terrific. I had an interesting situation. I actually just read Dr. Rosenthal's book called Supermind. And I could ask you a very general question, which I want to ask you, which is, what is Supermind? But if you think that's going to take a long time to explain, Norman, I wanted to ask you a question, several questions about supermind, actually to both of you. Norm, do you want to talk about what is supermind?
Sure.
Talk about
Yes.
my
When I was
You have-
finishing my first book, Transcendence, I thought I'd said the last word I had to say on TM, but I was wrong. As I meditated over the next 5 years, I became aware that there are multiple aspects of brain functioning and mind functioning that grow, including creativity, including equanimity, the capacity to engage and detach as the case requires. The idea that the world just suddenly seems to work in your favor much more, the so-called supportive nature, and that you can be in the zone. So there seemed to be this cluster of different qualities. So I did a survey of more than 600 seasoned meditators. And indeed, what they find is that after you meditate over time and regularly, these qualities that I've just outlined begin to grow. And since there was this cluster of very desirable traits that are fostered by continued meditation, I called it the supermind.
Well, it's beautiful to hear you say it in this short, concise time. It's very understandable. And I want to ask you something that I've sort of presumed or assumed or understood from reading a couple things and from hearing Bob tell about 3 waking states. So this is a question really for both of you. What I understand is that we live in 3 states of consciousness, which is waking, dreaming, and sleeping. But that there are actually 2 other states of consciousness, which I don't know if you both call it this, cosmic consciousness, and then a 5th one called transcendence. What struck me is that, and again, what I've understood, and I don't know if correctly, that that there is a state like the 4th state of cosmic consciousness, that if you meditate regularly and well, that in this 4th state of cosmic consciousness, you can actually have all 4 states of consciousness in meditation, especially in regular meditation. Is that true, or have I just assumed something correctly or incorrectly?
Go for it, Norm.
Oh, I was going to say the same thing.
I can.
The 3 ordinary states are waking, sleeping, and dreaming, and these are familiar to all of us.
Yes.
And if people had told me, well, there are other states, I wouldn't have believed it because I hadn't actually experienced it. But indeed, when you go into your meditation state, your TM state, you transcend. So you have this pure consciousness, which is you're awake, but you're not necessarily thinking of anything, and you are very relaxed and it's very pleasurable, but there are variations, but it's really, really different from dreaming, sleeping, and waking. So it's a 4th state. Then there are some people where that state folds over into the everyday life so that they're acting, being, living, doing their thing, and they're having some of that transcendence alongside that. And that's been called cosmic consciousness. But that's really part of what I think of when I think of the supermind. Those are 5 states of consciousness.
And cosmic in this case, Glenda, just means, it doesn't mean like woo-woo. It just means all-inclusive. So you have that inner silence, you know, that ocean, that inner silence maintained in the midst of waking, dreaming, and sleeping. And it's not far-fetched. We know when we feel good in ourselves, when we're rested and settled, then we carry a stability throughout the day. No matter what we do, we sleep better at night, dreaming, everything is just, there's a grace, like the athlete calls a zone. And so we just bring more and more and more of that out into our daily life. And that 5th state, supermind, is what athletes talk about the zone. We're inside, they're steady, and outside, bring it on.
Well, that's what I'm going to go on to. But let me ask another question on that. TM has so many benefits, and I want to ask about a bunch of them, but can it possibly help develop intuition? Question for both of you, both Norman and Bob.
Bob, you want to take it?
No, you're the doctor. I defer, then I'll comment.
I think it can, because intuition really means having access to as much of your consciousness as possible. You know, intuition is a strange thing because, you know, you get this insight from somewhere that you can't really put your finger on. And that's happening all the time. I will often come out of a meditation session and I intuitively understand something that I didn't understand when I was going into the session. Now, I haven't received any new information. Nobody has told me anything, but something has come to me from a part of my brain that wasn't accessible when I sat down, but that becomes accessible through the TM process. So that's what I call intuition, and I know it's been developed in my case. I know, for example, I might try to be writing and I'll be stuck and I can't write another word. And I'll sit down to meditate for 20 minutes. And then I'll come out and all of a sudden the words are flowing. Now, how did they get released? What was that process? I think it's mysterious. I don't think we know we don't know it at a physiological or neurophysiological level, but experientially, it's beyond dispute in my mind that this happens, not just to me, but to many, many people. I call that intuition.
Can I comment?
Please.
Yeah. So the question is, how do we get from here, this choppy waves, how do we transcend? How do we go beyond? How do we settle down from tension to just expansion and rest and wide awake? In TM, we use what's called a mantra, which is a word or a sound that has no meaning associated with it. You know, 1, 2, 3 syllables, no meaning. Because if it had a meaning, then you're stuck up here. And then a certified teacher instructs you how to use the mantra. Now, this is a point I want to make to explain. I'll do it very quickly. How we get from this point to this point. And the key word here is effortlessly. It's effortless. And I'm going to use an example. You're at home and you're working on something mindless, some numbers, or figuring something out, and in the other room, some of the most beautiful music you've ever heard in your life ever comes on. Where's your attention go? Wow, turn that up. That's the mind is not a monkey that needs to be corralled. Given the opportunity, the mind is drawn to something more satisfying, usually outside through the senses. Now, in self-transcending, we close the eyes, we learn how to give the attention of the mind in inward direction, and using this sound as a vehicle or as a facilitator, attention is turned within and without any effort, because deeper levels are increasingly more satisfying, your attention is automatically drawn inward to these more expanded, comfortable, familiar states. One last thing, somebody once said, it sounds, how do you do it for 20 minutes? They say, how do you know when your 20 minutes are up? And I say, well, you look at your watch. You're not going anywhere. You're just settling down. Okay, Glenda, back to you.
Okay. Dr. Rosenthal, and maybe both of you have said this, you have said that regular TM practice twice a day is the best way to cultivate the supermind. Is that correct?
You know, I wouldn't put it in a scientific context like that because I haven't conducted a study on 10 different things so that I can pull the best out of the hat. But I will say I've been a psychiatrist, clinical psychiatrist for over 40 years. I've been a researcher, and I find this quite extraordinary as a vehicle for self-development. I've used it myself. I've seen it in my patients. The data from my research shows it. So I would say it's a superb method, but the best, I don't have that data.
I got it. So I may have put words in your mouth. Bob?
Yes.
Comment on the importance of regular TM practice twice a day.
Well,
And
traditionally, it's an interesting thing.
These rewards.
Yeah, it's interesting because people often say, oh, I'd love to be able to meditate. Well, there's a lot of misunderstandings. People say, I've tried, Glenda, they say, oh, I've tried to meditate, I can't do it. My mind is a monkey, I can't control my mind. I can't stop my mind from wandering. Remember, there's different types of meditation. In this meditation, we don't self-transcending. We're not trying to stop the mind. Thoughts are not the bad guy. We're just going from an excited, heated level of the mind to a quiet, settled, cool, calm level of the mind. Now, when we do that, it is a powerful preparation for activity. So we do it first thing in the morning for 20 minutes. People will say, well, I don't have the time. And I say, well, there's 1,440 minutes in your day. If you don't have, 20, 30 minutes to set aside for developing your brain, you may need to reprioritize. Just a hint on your day. Maybe get up 20 minutes earlier. So you do it first thing in the morning. It's a preparation for the day's activity. It's very enjoyable. The time goes by quickly. And then you do it again. So that sets you for the day. Then you do it again at the end of the day. It washes off the stress. Cortisol levels go down. Serotonin goes up. And then you sleep better at night. So really, it's a wonderful bookend. Are you doing it now more regularly, Glenda?
Absolutely.
And how have you noticed it?
It is my big lesson. Well, I'll tell you, but are you finished responding?
Yeah, I'm done. It's now your turn.
I wonder if you recall, Bob, that we all learned, especially me, because we featured him. Jerry Seinfeld taught me and us. He spoke on one of your programs saying that he had always done once a day meditation. And somebody told him, you really ought to do it twice. And he thought, oh, I don't have time, et cetera, et cetera. He finally found time. He did it at lunchtime. And he said his life changed. And that was very impressive to me. And frankly, I didn't take it to heart then. But just recently, since I've been following your free meditations, which are just important that they're free and that they happen at the same time and I can tune in every day and then do my own in the morning, I think it's very important. And I don't have the specific things that it has taught me, but I feel better. I feel grounded somehow and actually able to soar. So it does make a difference, but it's my big lesson that twice a day seems to have some magic about it. But
it's more than just twice as good. Do you have another question for Norman, or can I ask a question for Norm?
please,
No, you.
because I have more questions, but please.
No, Norm, is stress such a big deal? I remember, people would say, oh, stress, just, be tough, push it away. But what we understand about stress, and we understand that Glenda has 11,000 questions to ask, but what impact does stress have on the brain, on body, on the nervous system?
Well, I think that there are, if you just take the present time, I see endless articles crossing my transom each day about COVID and the stress or the worries and the fears and will they get it and what can they do about it, and checking up the number of deaths per day and will I be next, or what, this kind of thing, or the economic impact of the thing. And, maybe your job is on the line, or you're worried about your revenue and you're worried about covering, will you be pitched out of your apartment because you can't cover the rent? So there's an endless amount of anxiety and despair and depression, worries that's going on over and above what you normally get, which is a high baseline to start with. We're a stressed society. There's just, no way around it. You're seeing even with these protests, that's another source of stress.
Yes.
Inequality and fear of what, certain segments of the population are afraid of just going and doing ordinary things. That's what this whole movement is about with Black Lives Matter. They're afraid. So yes, there's a tremendous amount of stress and more need now for something like TM than ever. And just to answer Glenda's question about regularity and frequency, those were the two things that emerged in my survey as to what promotes growth of the mind. Great. Doing it twice a day and the duration of how long you've been doing it for, those are the two most important factors that emerged from the analysis.
Well, actually, another question that came in from one of the attendees, listeners, she said, after how long of doing TM do you start gaining benefits? maybe a difficult question.
Some people gain benefits after the first session. One patient that I mentioned in my book was a man who had PTSD. He was in the military. He was taught by a friend of mine. And as he was driving home, he called her and she said, what you calling for? And he said, because I was laughing. And she said, well, that's not such a big deal, really, that you were laughing. He says, yeah, but it's the first time I've done that in 10 years.
Oh my God.
So that was after like one session. So, you know, the changes can start right at the beginning and then progress from there.
I wanted to comment on the last question about stress. We had discussed it in our last session because I had been reading, this phrase struck me, that what we're experiencing is something called collective trauma. And I think that's fascinating. And the person who wrote this was saying what we need now is collective resilience. But collective trauma just characterizes what we're all feeling and possibly don't imagine that everybody else is feeling. But by the time you add COVID and racial protests and illness and death, we're in collective trauma, correct?
If I may jump in, I would say it's a beautiful phrase. And I would say what we need is collective care, self-care and care for one another. And
Exactly.
you know, this is partly what you're doing with this wonderful series, is showing people how to care for themselves and care for one another in different ways.
Thank you, Bob. Same for you.
Same. Go on, next question.
Well, well, actually, I had read that some people, after starting TM, many people have lower medical bills. In other words, it's not only the transcendence and the zone and some beautiful calm, but actually helping the body and disease. And one person asks us if does TM prevent Alzheimer's? So, but say the one about do we get lower medical bills? In other words, are we beginning to help with TM? Are we beginning to help some of our physical medical conditions?
Well, there's one study on that subject done in Canada where they looked for insurance expenditures, the expenditures on the part of an insurance company for individuals. And what they found was that after individuals started their TM, their medical expenses went down, whereas the natural curve was to go up and up as people get older. So that's the only systematic study, but there's every reason to believe there would be. If you've got less blood pressure and fewer heart attacks and fewer strokes, it would sort of stand to reason, but that's the only hard data that we've got on the subject.
And Alzheimer's?
Alzheimer's, I'm afraid we can't really make any claims on that basis at this time. I think what it could certainly do is to decrease the terrible anxiety that comes about when you start realizing that you're forgetting things. But the actual process of Alzheimer's, the proteins that are made, the amyloid, the tangles, the various microscopic changes, I don't think anything has really impacted that as of now.
But they do know that there are risk factors. Insomnia is a risk factor. High blood pressure is a risk factor. So it does address the risk factors, but there's never been any study on TM and pre-onset Alzheimer's, but it certainly does affect the risk factors.
Well, I think that oftentimes Alzheimer's becomes a catch-all phrase for brain deterioration. And a lot of brain deterioration is happening on a vascular level. High blood pressure can cause small vessel disease or stroke in the brain. And stress can cause trouble again with arteriosclerosis. And that definitely does progress problems. And of course, Alzheimer's itself is worse if it's got concomitant arteriovascular problems. So we know TM can affect the second group. And so there's every reason, if you're worried about your brain and interested in your brain health, every reason to do TM.
Great. This is a question from the audience. How does regular TM influence people who suffer from depression? And can you show that how TM influences those with emotional issues? So we've been skirting this, but this is a particular question about emotional issues and depression related to TM. Bob, comment?
Norm, you talk, and then I'll comment about the ease of the practice.
In terms of actual clinical depression, we don't have any studies on that to show any effect. However, there have been a number of controlled studies in various groups where depression has been measured as a dimension. And in those studies, it's been shown that people with TM feel less depressed, they feel lighter, they feel happier, they feel easier. So the clinical depression in its worst sense, no data. Depression in terms of a personality variable that's hugely important, yes, it can be helped.
And the one thing that I wanted to say is, Glenda, is the ease of the practice. I was saying earlier about how it's the nature of the mind. Everyone has it built-in nature of the mind to be drawn to something more satisfying. It's like the nature of water is to wet, the nature of fire is to burn, the nature of the mind, given the opportunity, gets drawn to something more satisfying. So the technique is simply like you teach a child how to dive. You say, take the correct angle, and then gravity takes over. So the same with meditation. It's taught, and it takes about an hour a day over 4 consecutive days to learn. It's taught in personal instruction on that first day from a teacher, but it's so easy. So the ease of the practice makes it very accessible. So if a person is very depressed or highly anxious, Dr. Rosenthal has done a little bit of work with bipolar disorder. Maybe if there's time, you can talk about the work that you're leading, a major study, the largest clinical research study ever done on meditation and PTSD. So I want to make the point that it's easily accessible, and there's no belief and there's no philosophy. There's no philosophy. So, but Glenda, if you have another question, in other words, if there's time, Norm could mention this.
I absolutely need to hear that because, as you know, Bob, we're all looking for ways to support and analyze and help all kinds of people, not just vets with PTSD. It's incredibly important. And so, Norm, can you tell us what about this study?
Yes, it's a very exciting study, and Bob has managed to find funding for this incredible multi-center PTSD study in the VA system, where we're hopefully going to get 7 or 8 different sites to follow up on an earlier study of ours that was published last year in a very prestigious journal called The Lancet. And that showed from San Diego that TM was as good as a sort of top-notch treatment for PTSD called prolonged exposure. So without exposing people to the traumatic battleground circumstances of the control treatment, we were able to show that this very gentle treatment is just as good and better than a control. So based on our encouragement at that positive finding, we're now doing it in multiple centers and are very optimistic that we'll find something valuable that can help many
I want to add that it's on PTSD, it's on suicidal ideation. 21 veterans take their lives every day in this country because of the PTSD they suffered. This, for me, is absolutely unacceptable. So we want to put a stop to that. And the idea, and also substance use disorder, and it's on men and women, veterans, both. They're together, but also looking at them individually. And the idea behind this research and research that we're doing now on first responders, the David Lynch Foundation provides for free instruction to doctors, nurses, other healthcare providers on the front lines of the COVID-19 epidemic. We provide it for free through hospitals. And large studies are now being done on TM for burnout. The idea is that data will then be able to be used for reimbursement for all doctors and nurses to learn. And also the study Dr. Rosenthal is heading up is to qualify for funding from the VA for the 1 million veterans who suffer from PTSD.
It's so exciting. So proud of both of you for getting into this. And we really want to watch the progress. Thank you so much. Bob, I think I have two things for you. One, you were going to end with a 3 or 4 minute
Oh yeah.
silent,
Oh yeah.
something or other. I don't know if it's
A little breathing, a little
breathing, but I
Yeah.
have the last question, which is so important, from one of our attendees. And she says, can either of you tell listeners how to tune into the free meditations by Bob? Bob, can you first tell us how, I don't know how
Well,
much
it's
you want
actually
to tell, but can you tell?
it's actually a long URL, which I haven't memorized it. And it's for people who practice TM, but it's also lovely for people who don't to spend that time to meditate. But is there an email or something that I can give you that you can send, that you could let everybody know?
Yes. Why don't we just say that for the people that asked for the recording, we'll find a way to get back to you with your information, Bob, on the various times. Is that acceptable to you?
It's a Zoom which has all these numbers and I don't know them all. Yes, that would be great.
Sarah or Steve, our techies are listening, and I hope that we can put that information out, because it helps people all over the world, as I said, including myself. So Bob and Norm, thank you so much. You both are brilliant. You're good friends. You are generous. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I want to hand it over to Bob to do a few minute
Little breathing meditation. But
breathing.
before we do that, we must stop and acknowledge Glenda Greenwald for this vision. You've been doing this for years. It's an honor for me to do anything with you, for you, Glenda. You're an amazing humanitarian and a wise soul. So obviously to learn meditation, whether it's mindfulness, focused attention, transcending, as I said, you learn from us. It's not taught, it's not a mass meditation, it's not taught out of a book. You have your own coach, you have your one-to-one, you learn from a trained teacher. You can go to tm.org for that. It's a nonprofit organization. But what I'm going to do right now is a very simple little breathing exercise. I teach it to professional athletes and CEOs and moms and kids. And all we're doing is we're going to just, sitting as you're sitting, we're going to breathe in through the nostrils. See, when we're anxious, we breathe in through our mouth, like that, and it just goes into the lungs. But when we breathe in through the nostrils, then the air comes up into the head, and it has, as Dr. Rosenthal can say, oxygen has a very good effect on the brain. It's a calming effect on the brain. So we're going to, just sitting comfortably, we're going to inhale through the nostrils. Oh, and when you inhale, fill up your belly. So breathe from there. Bring the air up into your lungs, up into your head. Just hold it for 2 seconds. And then out through your lips, just barely open, softly. And deflate the lungs like a basketball, soccer ball. Hold that for a second or two. And then back in through the nostrils. From your belly, extend your belly. So it's really, hold it for a second or two. And then out. We're going to do that, we're going to do that for like 2 minutes. Just do that quietly on your own, eyes open, eyes closed. You can think about whatever you want to think about. You don't have to put your attention, focus anything, just be easy. We'll do it for 2 minutes. Okay. You can stop. This is something you can do at any time. It's not meditation, it's not transcending, it's a wonderful little tool that if things get intense, you can teach it to your child. It's just bringing oxygen to your brain. But thank you very much, Glenda, for having Norman and I here as guests.
Thank you, Norman. Thank you, Bob. Ciao, everyone. Oh, I should please, sorry, I got carried away. I would have one ending to thank you both so much for coming. Thank you to our audience for coming and getting educated on the science of meditation and brain health. Thank you again to our sponsors, Lugano Diamonds and Alpine Bank. And I want to remind everyone about our next session. It will feature Louis Schwartzberg and his presentation, Your Brain in Nature, The Healing Power of Awe. Louis is the producer, director of the fantastic Fungi film, which has gotten super national and world acclaim. He'll be on next Monday, June 15th at 4 p.m. Mountain Time. You can register on our website, www.aspenbraininstitute.org. Ciao, everyone. Ciao, everybody.
Ciao.
Ciao.